Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us on this video roundtable today. Today we're going to be talking a bit about the customer experience management market, which is a growing aspect of the wireless industry and telecom industry in general. We recently here at RCR did a report on this and also had a webinar coverage still on the topic that you can check out on our rcrwireless.com website. So for our talk today, I'll be joined by Rob Rich, who is the Managing Director of the TM Forum's Transformation Research Center. Rob, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Dan.
And also joining us is Hillel Roy, who's a fellow at IBB Consulting. Hillel, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Well, again, one of the things we're going to talk about here is obviously this is CEM is a big kind of topic in the industry. As the telecom markets have evolved and matured, it's become very important for carriers to become more in tune with what their customers are looking for and how their customers are interacting with their services. In the past, carriers were perhaps a bit flippant when it came to customer experience management, obviously because there were still a lot of new customers out there to go get, so there wasn't maybe as much focus on this aspect of the market. Where nowadays, with more mature markets, especially here in the U.S. and some other European markets and in Asia, it's become more important for carriers to really focus on making sure their customers have a good experience across their network, whether it's customer care, whether it's network integration, just different aspects of it to make sure the customers are happy with the service and that they stay customers for a longer time, because obviously it has become a much more competitive market out there, and carriers are always looking to steal customers from their competitors. So if a customer has a bad experience with one carrier, it tends to make them ripe for picking off by another carrier. So CEM has become a very important topic for a lot of carriers out there. And with today's conversation, we're going to talk kind of on two angles of this. One, looking at kind of the overall general customer care aspect of CEM, and with that, Rob will be providing some insight there. But also looking at the network side as well. And this becomes important as carriers are becoming more reliant on other network resources to offer services, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's small cells. There's the issue there of customers going across different networks and making sure that they have a seamless experience and not a poor experience that would perhaps drive them to churn down the road. So, and Hillel's done a lot of work on that front as well. So, and again, in the report that we did on this topic, we kind of covered both aspects of it. So, hope to get some more insight today on those from our two panelists. So, again, guys, thanks so much for joining us on this. Well, I guess maybe start off with, I got a few questions on this topic here. And I know when I was doing this report, one thing I realized from talking to a lot of people about this, whether it was carriers or vendors, was that it was really important in the overall scheme of CEM to make sure that an organization has support for this across the board. It's one thing to say that carrier is working to implement CEM, but if the support is not there from the highest up offices down to customer care offices, it seems like some of these issues can kind of get lost in translation, and there's not a full support behind this. And so I guess hoping to get from you guys, I guess, your view on the importance of that kind of support for CEM when it comes to implementation. So maybe from Rob, I guess your general view of I guess the need for a broad deployment of this and for a broad support for CEM implementations from a company.
Sure. So let me say, I think that first of all, upper management support, so top management support for customer experience is very important, and it is important to have broad support across the organization because of the consistency that is required in dealing with customers, whether we're talking about product, whether we're talking about channel, whether we're talking about just a support, just a variety of different functions, because customer experience, most people define customer experience as the customer's experience at every touch point across the service provider. So that starts with having the idea in shopping, right? Maybe a visit to the retail store, maybe a web experience, maybe a call center contact center experience, something maybe even a partner experience, depending on how you're dealing with channels, across to the order and the order management, and it might be a multi-product or bundled order management, and you might have silos for products, across to support for those things, and then even for, let's say, retention management, churn management, upselling, all of those kinds of things. You need to have a level of consistency and transparency and trust, and the only way you can get that is by having a consistent view and a consistent support across the organization.
That's a good point. I mean, and that does seem like that's still a bit of a challenge because, again, like you said, it is such a broad a reach for this. I mean, obviously it goes, like you said, from touch points at a retail environment back to the network, inside. I mean, to the deepest part of the networks. To the different marketing aspects of it. I mean, it seems like it is such a broad based deployment that it is almost probably something that carriers aren't used to doing, because again, because carriers do have certain silos, whether it's the network side, the retail side, that very frequently don't talk to each other. Where this is something that has to be across the whole platform.
No, and you're right, and there are so many, gosh, there are so many aspects to this. I mean, from the organizational, even the policy perspective, but also you start to get into multi-channel there, right? And so it's even consistency across channel. I mean, what happens when a customer does their research on the web, maybe calls the call center with a question, or perhaps chats with somebody with a question, and then they go to the store, let's say for a phone, because they just have to hold that phone in their hand before they buy it, right? And then they get a completely different story, or different pricing scheme or something like that at the store. A lot of customers are going to walk out if they come in with expectations that aren't met in the store, and consequently you just lost your chance at acquiring a new customer, or perhaps retaining one. So all of these things are very important. The other aspect of this is, remember, a lot of service providers grew up in organizational silos, and this is not just with service providers, and let me talk about that in a second, but they grew up in organizational silos, even service silos. The voice group is different than the data group, is perhaps different than the value-added services group, or communication services group, and so on and so forth. And all of those things have to be pulled together, because they are one entity from a customer perspective, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you're right. I mean, from the customer's point of view, it is Verizon, it is Sprint, it is T-Mobile. It is not T-Mobile's network side. It's not Verizon network. It's one name, and that's kind of what they expect to have. So absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. No, I guess maybe on this point of view, I mean, obviously you've done a lot of work on the network side of things and kind of tracking how carriers kind of handle the network issues here. I mean, are you seeing that there's enough support from the network side to make sure that CEM is able to kind of be used and brought across the entire network? I mean, are the network guys open to this, and are they kind of open to working more closely with the various aspects, the different silos of the carrier, to make sure that the customer does have, at the end of the day, a great experience when they're on the network? Oh, the mute button. Oh, mute button.
I'm sorry, I just realized I was talking on mute. Bad customer experience. So when you look into the network impact of when you go back, say around 10 years, it was mostly a voice network. So we could roughly put it into 3 buckets: if the voice quality is good, if it's bad, or if it has dropped. And it was a lot simpler back then, though the network always had a strong focus on dropped calls, on the call quality, which you used to call RX qual in GSM days. So in my past as network engineer, we always used to have review meetings on what was the call quality report, what was the call drop report, and which used to go all the way up to the senior level, and we didn't like to have that meetings. But the key fact is there was strong focus. When you look at now, it has gotten way more complicated. When you look at the data usage, for example, say 500 kilobits data connection, that's good enough and pretty satisfying for a customer who is just doing email. But when you look at a customer who is trying to do high definition video streaming, for them they need higher data rate. Or a customer who is trying to do voice or live video streaming instead of stored video streaming, for them it's very important that the latency is also very low. Not only it's about bandwidth. So there are so many dimensions in terms of what the customer is doing, what type of device they are doing it on, and what type of network they are using, that it has become a way more complex paradigm. And the network team are constantly evolving new techniques to address the customer experience and track it.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. I know when I was talking to some carriers about this, they did mention that in the past it was a bit about kind of the drops and blocks and all those different little things that people used to talk about, but it has become kind of different now, where it's data centric and it seems like it's a lot more perhaps more technical too. So maybe is that Hello, is that a bit of a challenge, making sure that the network people can provide information what's happening, that they can actually use the information in a relevant and a personal way with the customers.
Yes, absolutely. When you bring in all the dimensions of devices, the type of application, it starts becoming too complex very soon. So quite often you try to focus a bit of quantitative measure, for example, the bit error rate. If they are aware, for example, when you were downloading video, how many jittering or the effect of buffering or the latency. And then you also look at the qualitative measurements, for example, how happy the customers have been in general.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, I know, like during the webinar we had a couple weeks ago on this topic, we had quite a few questions that came in. Excuse me, and I wanted to make sure I touch on some of those too, because we ran out of time during that to get to a lot of questions. But I know one of the questions that someone had brought up was, and this might be something Rob might be able to touch on a bit, is someone was asking about, I guess, the challenges that face companies when they're implementing, when they're first implementing a CEM solution. So, whether that's a software issue, a vendor issue. I guess maybe Rob, when you kind of take a step back and look at companies implementing CEM solutions and people you've talked to about this, what are you seeing as maybe some of the initial challenges that they face when going about this? I mean, obviously, hopefully, that you got the support across the board from the organizations. But once that is in place, what is kind of that next challenge for them when they look at implementing an organization-wide CEM solution?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to get your strategy straight, and you need to understand what data you're trying to capture and how you are trying to measure customer experience. And this is really important, because a lot of service providers I'm seeing don't necessarily have a strong portfolio, if you will, of metrics that are important, nor understand who they should be reporting these metrics to, and who owns the metrics, and and who owns moving the needle, if you will, on the metrics, and so on and so forth. So I think the first thing you have to look at is that, and part of that is part of the process, in fact, of selecting an appropriate system in the first place. So if you haven't done that and you've already acquired a system, you're probably in trouble. And maybe you can add on some analytics at the end, but I mean, you need to make sure that there are at least some best practices encapsulated or implemented within and reflected within the system. I guess the next thing that I would probably say is to make sure that you've done a good user acceptance test and a sign-off, and you can map let's say the behavior of the system against what your expectations were, and your expectations were clear. Because if your expectations weren't clear, and you weren't clear about those expectations with the vendor or with the systems integrator, whoever is supplying that in whatever role they're playing, it's going to be much more difficult to get their assistance and their cooperation in terms of changing the system for you, or at least affecting whatever change is necessary to to accomplish your goals. So I guess the simple case is when you fail to plan, you plan to fail, frankly, and I don't know how else to say it. And I see situations all the time where I come in with some of these to try and mediate them, and I, as a consultant, and I see situations where business processes weren't even documented before. Never mind the whole metric hierarchy and distribution and responsibility and all of that. So I mean, to me, those are the most important things. I guess the next important thing is to establish scope, and we always say when you're doing projects that you should think big but start small, right? So establish the scope of the different steps in the rollout that you're going to be doing, and set expectations and metrics around that, and make sure you do your training right, and so on and so forth. So make sure that your project plan for the rollout, for the implementation, is communicated to your integrator, or your system supplier, or your IT organization if they're doing the implementation, and and manage it. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I guess maybe on that topic too. I guess looking at it from the network side as well. I mean, it does seem like that from the network side. Again, with all these different technologies coming online, the carriers are using, whether it's Wi-Fi or small cells, it seems like that the challenges from that point of view are still pretty significant. I mean, those are issues that still are kind of reliant on technology that perhaps is coming online now, but there's still some issues with being able to handle seamless transition and handoff between different networks, make sure customers can actually do that successfully. I mean, are you seeing that the industry is able to is being able to match that need, the need to be able to make sure that customers are having that good experience, that there's not a huge challenge in place when they're trying to deploy these services across their organization?
Yeah, we definitely have a strong focus on resolving that. And going back to the point Rob was highlighting, that we need a strong user acceptance testing. And what we are observing is when we are looking at deploying a network now, in old days it was mostly just about, okay, we have better than the minimum signal string, and we have enough number of voice circuits. But now we have to look at it more holistically when you are, for example, designing it for a shopping mall. The type of applications people will use there tend to be different compared to when you are doing it for a convention center. So it's an upfront requirements definition. You have to think through a bit about the user experience and the use cases, what people are going to do there. The second issue that comes is theoretically everything can be solved if there is enough money. Unfortunately, there isn't. So that's where we get into all these heterogeneous networks. How do we combine the LTE, Wi-Fi, small cells, all these components to deliver what the customer wants without breaking the bank? So that brings in the complexity that when we are trying to serve someone using Wi-Fi, be it free or be it lower cost, when do we move them to Wi-Fi? How do we give them incentive to move to Wi-Fi? Or if the Wi-Fi network is crowded, how do we pull them back into the LTE network? So there is a lot of work going on around handling the migration between the licensed and the unlicensed networks. For example, the Hotspot 2.0 standard, which Wireless Broadband Alliance and Wi-Fi Alliance, they are working on. The access network discovery and selection function, which the LTE standards body, the 3GPP partnership project, they are working on. All those point to the direction of ensuring a seamless customer experience.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, like you said too, I mean, if money wasn't an issue, these would be very simple problems to fix. But yeah, like you said, companies seem to be every year trying to cut more and more from budgets. So yeah, trying to do this at a cost-efficient rate is a bit of a challenge too. So that absolutely adds some more difficulty to the solution. So that makes sense there. Well, I know another topic that was brought up that the companies I was talking to, but also in the webinar, was there were a lot of questions about, I guess, the impact that kind of this adoption of smartphones has had on carriers. I mean, obviously, with smartphones being more broadly adopted, networks are becoming more stressed with people using data services. But there was also talk a lot about being able to use those devices to enhance that customer experience. And obviously, smartphones now are becoming more powerful, so they can handle a lot of the processes that perhaps were on the network side in the past, or customer care that was not, that forced the customer to call into a call center to handle something. Now that stuff can be handled right on the device, whether it's offload between Wi-Fi and cellular, whether it's customer if they've got an issue with the network, they can interact with the customer care that way. Maybe from Rob, maybe I guess from your point of view, what impact has the smartphone growth had on the market, and is the industry taking advantage enough of that growth to really perhaps tap into being able to be a more personal experience with customers?
Okay, so here we're talking about largely the customer care aspect. I'm moving my hands too much, aren't I, Dan?
No, you're doing good.
Good. So here I think we're talking about the customer care aspect of it, yes,
Yeah.
and perhaps we can have Hillel talk a little bit about the network aspect of it, and of course the growth of data is just exponential, right?
Yeah.
And there are of course things that you need to do to manage that, as well as manage devices, right?
Yeah.
But getting back to the customer experience piece, I think what this has done is it's Well, I think really the results and the potential are mixed for service providers. On the one hand, it gives you the opportunity to do much, much more electronic self-care.
Yeah.
Right. If you can do it well, but one of the problems you're dealing with is you're dealing with a very small screen, so
Yeah.
you need to design for that, and you're dealing with a situation where you may not always have connectivity, so you need to, for example, design your systems where if they're trying to enter a transaction or something like that, that it can save if they get knocked off. It can save the previous transaction, right, or at least the information that they've entered for a partial transaction. Basically,
Yeah.
you've got to make it easy for them to do it, and you've got to be effective with it. But I think the largest two areas are in online self-care, if you like, and certainly in social networking, because we see, and we can talk about social networking now
Yeah.
or later if you want. I think it's the elephant in the room in a way, and I think it's something we're going to have to get to at
Yeah.
some point during this call if we're going to talk about CM. But I think you need to design very carefully for those screens, as well for tablets, right? But I think more and more for smartphones. And the other thing you need to remember, it's easy for us to sit in the United States and think everyone's got several screens to deal with. But in many cases, as we get to the developing world, as smartphones roll out there, and they're in various stages of rollout, but it's inevitable that it's going to happen in the developing parts of the world. This may be the primary internet access device or electronic access device. So the priority is really to design for the smaller device. So you can save a lot of money doing this. You can help your brand a lot if you do it right, or you can turn it into an unmitigated disaster, I think.
Well, the choice is yours, really.
Yes, it is.
Well, that's a good point, though. I mean, obviously on the self-care and the social part of it, I know I was talking with on our webinar we had someone from Sprint on board there, and they mentioned the self-care was becoming a very important part of their operations. And social was beginning to be tied into that. And it does seem like social is still maybe in the infancies of being tied into self-care, but there was definitely some. It seemed like there was some reservations though about using social, because again, social is still kind of a bit of a wild west out there, and it's hard to really pinpoint the accuracy of it. But at the same time, you can't ignore it, because again, there's not many of us left who haven't had some sort of social media connection, whether it's through a Twitter or Facebook, something at all. So, but you're right, it does seem like that's a big aspect of it. So maybe I guess your view on the integration is social being integrated at the right rate? Are there questions still about social when it comes to kind of integrating that with CEM?
Oh boy, Dan, I think there are tons of questions on social, and I'm just looking through my notes for some specific statistics that I can give you on this. And I think the first thing you need to recognize with social is it really, when we talk about this broadly, is it really depends on the country and the willingness of the culture, because social is such a cultural phenomenon, right? And it really depends on the importance of it. Really depends on the country and their willingness to share. So, for example, I was just looking at an Ipsos study that looked at participation of sharing opinions, media, URLs, and those kinds of things on social media across the world. And as it turns out, I mean, we have to be careful when we think about this as Americans, because Americans, along with Western Europeans and actually the Japanese, are among the least likely to share information on social networks. But if you get to countries like Latin American countries, for example, like Mexico and Brazil, if you look at Southeast Asia or even South Asia, so Indonesia, India, places like that, China, those are the countries that are the most likely to share. In fact, when Ipsos did their survey, in Mexico, almost 90% of respondents had shared information on social media over the last 6 months. About 88% in Indonesia, about 85% in India, same in Brazil, and maybe 83% in China. Now contrast that to the States, where it's around 60%, to France, where it's about 48%, and to Japan, where it's about 30%. So this is clearly a country-based issue or a culture-based issue, if you like, to give you an idea on this. So some things about social networking. I mean, first of all, everything is public, right? Everything you do now is public, and if it's not, it will be in a few nanoseconds, if you like, right? As people share this across their networks. So, and the other thing is, frankly, you lose control of your brand. Your customers on social media, your customers control your brand. You don't. You can influence it, but your customers control your brand. And as I say, virtually every transaction you do, good or bad, is magnified by social media. The problem is that, as you say, it's like the Wild West. People tend to write about or communicate about their bad experiences far more often than they do about their good experiences. So it's really a two-edged sword here.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good things you can do with social media as well. You know, you can use it for for lead generation and marketing. If you do it well, you can use it for brand management, influence now, not control. Okay, you can certainly use it for care and social networks. Let's say as distinct from social media, so connections versus media and content, if you like, can be very helpful in assessing impact of churn for an individual, right? And
Yeah.
I think all of I won't go far into that, but I think all of these things are relatively well understood. But there's so much happening in social media that impacts both the customer experience and the care aspect of Steve.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Honestly, a big part of it. Well, maybe taking a step back, then I guess back to the device part of it, and bringing Halal back on here is I obviously when it comes to customer care, like I was saying, that with the device, carriers can now rely perhaps more on the device to kind of handle some of those issues when it comes to customers going across different networks or handling their make sure they have a good experience doing that. Has it seemed like that carriers are tapping enough into those devices though to make the device kind of that focal point for I guess that interaction with customers when it comes to network issues?
Happened is a lot of the power of what they do and what type of experience they get has moved from the carriers to the users.
Mm-hmm.
So quite often a challenge that comes is when you give Ferrari to a driver, will the driver enjoy the Ferrari or very quickly kill himself? Depends on the level of awareness of the driver. So I believe the customer education also plays a big role here in terms of setting the right expectation that, hey, even if you have a LTE device, when you are seeing 3G on that device, that it's on a 3G network, do not expect that you will get high level or high quality HD streaming till you move to another network. Or if there are Wi-Fi networks in the vicinity, and depending on their signal strength, depending on if you can access those networks, quite often migrating to those networks may be a better way of getting the data you want or the experience you want instead of sticking to the original network. So there are a number of these factors which are coming up, and the way to address one is, of course, increased customer education, making more and more options available. And the third part is, which we talked about earlier, is also at the same time providing more support to customers. Because for a customer, say in a stadium who has just moved on to the Wi-Fi network for getting better quality, but now that the network is crowded, it's a bit too much to expect that the customer will always keep monitoring the two and will keep manually switching back and forth. So the policy enforcement where the operator can look at both and make a decision on behalf of the customer, hey, the Wi-Fi is getting too crowded or the LTE is getting too crowded, we are moving you to the other one. Those are some of the efforts that we are working on in improving the customer experience.
Yeah, I guess I was going to ask a bit about, I guess, the importance of being able for a carrier to kind of perhaps scan into another network before transitioning a customer to that network to make sure that the signal strength is stronger or strong enough for what they need, because it does seem like that requires a lot of perhaps different sensors out at the edge of a network to really be able to kind of scan what's happening out there. Because again, it doesn't make any sense to move a customer to a Wi-Fi network if that Wi-Fi network is more congested than the LTE network that they're on. So it does seem like that's an important part. But also, it seems like that you have to be able to get that information quickly, perhaps to a customer care representative, because if a customer is having a bad experience on a Wi-Fi network, and a customer is looking to maybe call in to see what's happening with my network issue or what's going on. It's important for that customer care representative to have that information at hand. Whether it's if there's a tower down somewhere, or if there's Wi-Fi congestion. It seems like you have to have that access to that information to be able to handle a customer query as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So self-help is another area with the additional power of the smartphone, improved browsers and data rate, where you can improve. For example, if you look at the Wi-Fi network, the Wi-Fi networks are meant to be deployed only at certain places, not contiguous. Now, in the old world, people will always be guessing, oh, I'm in this park. Do I have the network here or not? I'm next going to that shopping mall. Will I get this network? But nowadays, for example, when you look at the MSO Wi-Fi networks, a lot of them offer the Wi-Fi Finder application. So on your smartphone, you can pull up a map and can clearly set your expectation that, okay, these are the areas I will get the network. And of course, there's ongoing work on giving more real-time information on network outage, setting the expectation on when it will be back on. And these are definitely the frontiers where we can use the improved power of network and device to improve the experience.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like, too, I guess, from the smartphone point of view, but it's important, though, to make it as seamless as possible. I know I've kind of said that a few times, but it does seem like, because you look at some of the customer base out there. There's 10% who are the early adopters, who know all the technology jargon, who know how to switch back and forth from Wi-Fi. But there's that other 90% who are still just want their phones to work, don't want to have to open an application, don't want to have to hit Wi-Fi on, Wi-Fi off. They just want it to work as much as possible. Does it seem like the industry is getting that aspect of it, that it has to still be a very seamless transition for customers, for it to really be a good experience for them across the network?
Yes, definitely. When you talk to the wireless carriers, that's one of the key concerns top of their mind, that we make our money by providing a reliable network. Now, if the customer always have to keep choosing it, then that dilutes our value proposition. So we definitely need to get there where it's seamless, not only from network quality, but also authentication in terms of the security, all those viewpoints. So instead of, nowadays when you look at Wi-Fi, 20 SSIDs will show up and you have to manually select which one you want. But the vision for the future is it will automatically be done like the way cellular roaming works now.
Yeah, makes sense. And maybe from your point of view, do you get a sense that the industry is getting it, that it has to be that the key for CEM is really to make things as easy as possible for customers out there?
I think simplicity is and has always been a hallmark of CM, regardless of the industry. And I think it's even worse now, or I should say, even more important now, that people focus on simplicity because of the nature of people and the expectation around instant gratification, if you like. So getting things quickly, getting things simply, if you like. So masking all of that complexity is very, very important. And masking it at multiple levels. I talked about the network level, but also at the application level, especially now. You're not going to impact every app that a customer uses on their smartphone, for example, but you certainly can do a lot of testing, let's say, on devices before you release them to understand what applications are difficult and what aren't, to optimize the applications that you ship on the device when you ship it, and certainly to simplify your customer experience screens, if you like, when they're trying to get help. So simplicity. It's one of the hallmarks, and it always has been.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I know one of the topics that I touched on a bit in the report that I did on this was it seems like that the need for a quality experience for customers is becoming more important, not just for data but also for voice, as carriers are looking to roll out voice over LTE services. That seems to be the next push for carriers, is to kind of push all their voice traffic to their data network, so basically to the LTE network. And that seems to be still a bit of a challenge, because even though a lot of the carriers are rolling out LTE networks really rapidly, still trying to get that ubiquitous coverage will be a challenge for customers, just because customers still rely on voice quite a bit. I mean, I know data is growing a lot, but voice is one of those things that still is relied on. But also, the voice seems to be something that you can't mask a bad experience on as much as you can with perhaps the data connection. I mean, with data connections, if you happen to drop a bit here or there, you can kind of pull it back together without the customer really knowing it. But with voice, if you start getting the lost words here and there, people notice it right away. And so I guess maybe from Hilal, maybe from your point of view, does it seem like that the challenges for the carriers is becoming at least the network challenges is becoming making sure that voice quality across the various connection points is going to be consistent and equal to what customers have right now? And is that something that can be achieved? Because again, when you go unlicensed, you kind of lose control of what's happening on the network. So that could be a bit of a challenge there.
Yes, of course, voice is a challenging issue, and it's not only the voice continuity. There are also issues, for example, when you are offering voice as a carrier, you have to support 911, and you have to offer certain level of location accuracy with that, and which are, I mean, just thinking of the voice continuity issue, I mean, if that's a simple challenge, these are probably even more complex challenge, and we know none of these are simple. I mean, as technologists or business people, we all know in any industry the most complex challenge is keeping things simple. So on the voice side, the carriers are looking at voice over LTE, and the view is as the LTE network gets more pervasive, we will not need to have the 3G networks as a backup for the voice. And we will definitely get there. It's a matter of time. If you remember early days of 3G, we still used to have a lot of 2G voice when we'll go to the edge of the network. Nowadays, it's almost non-existent. So it's just a matter of time when we'll have that enough coverage of the 4G networks.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Obviously, once kind of these networks get more and more ubiquitous out there, that should take care of that situation. But it seems like in the near term, I know Verizon's talking a bit about having only LTE devices at some point over the next couple of years. So for that to happen, though, you have to make sure you've got that ubiquitous coverage out there. I don't know, from Rob, from your point of view, kind of looking ahead like that. I mean, are there certain challenges that you see that carriers need to perhaps get ahead of to make sure that there aren't perhaps some issues that come back to bite them when it comes to making customers unhappy with the experience that they're going to perhaps have on the network?
Well, I think that certainly voice and making sure that as LTE is implemented and we move more and more to new technologies and potentially retire other technologies is a really important thing. I really think consistency and transparency are probably the two most important things. Beyond that, and probably flexibility as well. And let me speak to flexibility a little bit more in a second, but I think consistency and transparency are really important because I think those are things that engender trust, and I think trust is a fundamentally important thing in any kind of a relationship, and certainly in a customer relationship if you are looking to retain your customers. Now let me get to flexibility for a minute, and I'm really speaking about flexibility here from a business perspective. So there are a whole lot of new things happening, and we're starting to see some of them happen. For example, in the billing end, all right, when we talk about personalization. So if we start to look at policy management, for example, and customizing levels of service for different customers and customizing the applications and customizing the charging for that and moving into things like shared wallet, let's say types of packages and all of that. I think those become very important. You know, we haven't talked at all about segmentation yet, right? And customer segmentation is also a hallmark here and very important. So understanding how customers use their use their devices and the applications they use and where they go and all of and the kinds of things that they want to do on all of their devices, and making a plan, developing a plan for them that is, let's say, personalized, right, or at least focused on a segment, is a really fundamentally important thing to do if you're going to differentiate. So I think really understanding your customers and what they want and having the flexibility to provide the plans that they need and personalize those almost dynamically, I think becomes very important. People want choice, right? And they have choice in almost every other aspect of their life, if you like. I mean, maybe other than doing their taxes or something like that, right? But they have choice. They have choice in most aspects of their life, and they expect that from their service providers as well. Why wouldn't they? And if you're not providing it, and you're in a competitive environment, and someone else is, the propensity to churn is going to be enormous.
Yeah, I think it's taxes and your cable providers. Those are the two things you have no choice in anymore. So, but beyond those, you have choice for just about everything else. But
and even in some places, even with broadband providers, you do have have other choice. There are some overlay networks. Or there's satellite, right? You can go to DirecTV, for example, or whoever, right? So there's maybe more choice than meets the eye out there. But sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I guess that does touch on a bit on kind of the last topic I wanted to bring up here, and that's kind of the privacy issue of it. Because again, to provide a real customer experience management solution and to really provide something personalized for customers, it does require the collection and keeping of data on a customer. Whether it's obviously the big data has been a big talk past couple of years how important that's become. But the importance of that, but there's also I guess growing concern over the past several months, obviously of people, big organizations collecting your data. And whether they share that data with other companies, with marketers, with the government, that becomes a bit of a concern. Maybe 6-12 months ago, that wasn't as much a concern, but it does seem like events over the past couple of months have shown that maybe that should be more of a concern for consumers is how much do they trust. Obviously, you brought that up, Rob, the importance of trust. How much can they trust their carrier to have that information about them, whether it's the real time where they are, what they're doing on their phones. There's a level of trust there that perhaps carriers have dropped the ball on a bit lately, but that's an important part of all this, is to make sure that customers trust you if you're going to be able to provide that personalized service to them.
So, Dana, are you asking me? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Maybe,
all right.
What's your view on the privacy issue of it? I mean, what's your view of that part of being able to...
So I think trust, I think you get back to, I mean, when you think about human nature, and we talked about simplicity, and we talked about convenience, and we talked about choice, and so on and so forth, I think trust goes hand in hand with that, and I think historically it's been hard to say that customers feel that service providers have had their backs, if you will, right? And now, as you say, there have been a bunch of recent developments, probably the NSA being the most public of them,
yes.
Right? And now even in the Journal, I don't know whether you saw the Journal yesterday, but it talked about, for example, Google and Facebook and some other web companies' investments in dark fiber and the relationships that they need to have with the government in order to have that, and so on and so forth. And I think that is really scaring people. Indeed, here in the States, the NSA, one of the top guys at the NSA was just on 60 Minutes. I don't know if you caught that Sunday night, but talking about what they did capture and didn't capture. So trust is fundamentally important. And I will tell you, I think the service providers are getting this, whether they're completely there or not, and I don't think anybody is really yet. They are understanding this, and they are at least prioritizing the investigation of this. And this has shown up in a couple of ways too, from my perspective. We just did a big data survey, and it was interesting. We gave them about 25 different categories, and we asked them what the attractiveness was of these different categories. So it might be in customer support, or in retention management, or in network performance, or planning and design, or service management, or something like service performance, or something like that. And one of them was monetizing customer data. And I was surprised that it came in, probably 17th or 18th, maybe, something like that, on the list of 25. It came in relatively low. And while there were a handful of service providers who were very bullish on this, on selling customer data, and some people are out in front doing that. I suppose Telefonica is a good example of that, but I don't want to get into all of the names. But Um, uh, a number of them have said, A, we fear regulation and what will happen as a result of regulation, and it's not clear yet. And secondly, you know, we're going to make maybe thousands of dollars or maybe millions of dollars selling customer data, but we're making billions of dollars providing communication services to those same customers. So why would we risk? Why would we risk those customers' trust to make a little bit of incremental revenue?
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, there are a number of things you can do. There's anonymization and some other things that you can, some other strategies that you can pursue. But from a customer experience perspective, I think the most important thing is clarity and allowing customers to opt in versus defaulting to their opting in and making them opt out to gain their trust. So you need to be really clear on what data is going to be used for and on your policies, and you need to express that clearly and simply, and you need to give them access to that. And again, you need to give them choice and perhaps incent them to opt in for certain types of things. And of course, we've seen this kind of reaction even with social networks, right? With social media, for example, Facebook, as it has changed its privacy policies, has gotten tremendous feedback on this. So I don't know that we have all the answers on this yet, but it's a really important issue, and it's really important to be open and honest and transparent with your customers if you're going to maintain a good relationship with them and gain trust.
Makes sense, makes sense. And I guess, Helen, I guess from your point of view, I know you touched a bit on it earlier, you know, about the, you know, when it comes to just even connecting to a network, make sure that there's security there. And that's still a bit of a challenge because, you know, again, when you look at Wi-Fi or different connection methods like that, you know, it's a very hit and miss world when it comes to what has security and what does not have security. I know with Wi-Fi 2.0 or Hotspot 2.0 that the point is to try to get more security embedded in the system. Well, I guess, you know, is the market moving quick enough to make sure that customers' data is secure and that customers are aware that if there are security issues that they have the option to kind of make sure that they can increase that security if they need to, or you know, I guess providing that choice for consumers to make sure that they're aware of the situation and can kind of, I guess, make a judgment call whether they want to connect to a certain network or not connect to a certain network?
Yes. So when we talk about for example, the Hotspot 2.0 standard,
yep.
The 3 key tenets of that is making the network access seamless,
yeah.
Making sure the network has enough security in terms of who is allowed, and the third part is making the experience overall seamless. So the security definitely is one of the topics there. And when we talk about security and big data, I think there are two types of data we are talking about. One is the actual customer traffic,
yeah.
Like what I'm talking or what's in my email that's going out. And then the other part is the metadata, what I'm going, which websites I'm going to. So with improved encryption, definitely it will have benefits on both. Now, when it comes to the metadata, the topic that Rob was addressing, that it's about more clarity, making sure people understand what's going to be shared. And also the other part is the benefit statement. For example, whenever there is a change in the social status or what we share, what we don't, people are always hesitant about the change in the beginning. But it's about making sure that they understand how it's going to benefit them. Unless that statement is there, people are never going to warm up to it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes sense. Well, obviously, again, that's a big aspect of this, and hopefully it's something that can be challenged and managed correctly. Well, again, it's a topic that I know we can go on for quite a bit longer to discuss, but I don't want to drag on too much more on this. I do want to let our viewers know that if you do have some more questions or want some more information on this topic, like I said, we released a story on this 2 weeks ago, and also had a webinar on this topic, as you can see at our RCRWireless.com website. Also, you can go to the TM Forum. They released a report, which I happen to reach down and grab right here. Might not be able to see that. A recent report from them looking at customer experience that you can also check out from the TM Forum. Very in-depth, a lot of information there on the topic. And also, Hilal's got quite a few stories, columns on this on the IBB Consulting website. So make sure you check out the IBB Consulting site. Check out some of his information there on the issues when it comes to network and security and integration there with Wi-Fi. So again, well, guys, Rob and Hilal, thanks so much for the time today. We definitely appreciate it, and hopefully we can touch base again soon on this topic.
Thank you, Dan.
All right.
Thank you, Dan.
I believe we are clear. Yes? Kyle? Yes. Okay, I think we're good. Well, guys, well, Rob and all, again, thanks so much for the time. I know it was a bit back and forth there trying to get all the topics in there, but I definitely appreciate you guys working with me on that. It was definitely insightful, and like I said, I know this is a topic that we could discuss for a while longer, but I'm sure people are trying to look at my face, so we'll move along from that. So, again, I definitely appreciate the time today, guys.
No, I think it went very well. I think it flowed very nicely, and it was great to meet you. Hello, and
Same here, Rob.
let's do it again sometime.